This is the perfect room if you're looking to expand the family. It's perfect. There's a kid's room or a playroom.
Did you say playroom?
Yeah, playroom.
I've been very bad.
You know what, let me give you a moment. I'm gonna feed the pancake.
Yeah, you go feed
Okay.
the... Whatever.
Good evening and welcome to episode 65 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. It's the Tuesday edition of the show. I do hope that you enjoyed yesterday's episode replay, where we're, of course, talking about our interest rates, but actually more than anything, our score when it comes to our credit score with Michelle Dickens on the Private Property Podcast. And of course, if you've missed any of our past episodes, do go onto our YouTube channel to catch up, or also watch them right here on our Facebook page. And of course, as usual, you know we love giveaways. We're of course running our competition where we're asking you all about your town, whether your favorite part of the town or certainly your favorite feature about your town. We certainly want to know what it is that you love so much about your town and city. And all you have to do to enter that competition is follow the link that we have shared below. And as many of you know, you stand a chance of walking away with 2 1,000 Rand cash prizes right here live on the Private Property Podcast. And we'll be doing that giveaway on Friday, so it's this coming Friday, and you'll get to hear what the favorite, feature of their particular town or city from one of our lucky viewers is. So do stay tuned to that one, and of course continue entering. We certainly want to hear from you. Now, something that we're talking about this week, and I'm sure that it's something a lot of property investors have either tried out or perhaps are contemplating, especially during this time, and that is of course an alternative to the rental deposit. I know a lot of us have, I certainly know on this show, we've spoken a lot about the rental deposit, the different ways that we use it. And we've even, explored the different ways that landlords can use the rental deposit in the event where their tenants are currently going through a difficult time. But for this episode, we're saying consider this alternative and rent your next apartment deposit free. So never mind, taking the deposit and utilizing it for something else, but actually renting your apartment deposit free. And to better help us understand how that particular, alternative method could work or why you'd even want it to work, this evening I'm joined by Victor Motha, who's the co-founder and CEO of Depofy Financial Technology. Good evening, Victor. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Good evening, Zama. Thank you for having us.
So, because so one of the big things, and I was even saying off air, that I'm sure a lot of people are already thinking, or certainly landlords are thinking, okay, why would I even want to rent, my apartment or house rent free? And I'm sure there are probably tenants who are thinking, oh my goodness, this is such a big relief. The ability to get a place that you like, not need a deposit, that you'd be able to pay the rental, monthly payments, but you simply don't have that extra money lying around to pay that deposit. So there's certainly two different sides to the deposit story. Perhaps let's explore, the landlord side a little bit before we even get to, the tenants and the benefits. Let's look at why a landlord would, before they even consider, going deposit free, why they actually would not want to go that particular route. Because I think we're going to look at why this route and the different ways to use it. But let's perhaps explore why a lot of certainly landlords who the moment they hear deposit free are probably thinking, nope, that's not going to work. Let's rather not do that.
Awesome. Look, I think it's a fair thing to say to sort of look at why the deposit exists and also consider how people are using it before we consider why there is a need for this alternative. Because I think oftentimes people think we believe something is wrong when we try to improve or go better on it. But it's not necessarily that it's wrong, but we believe there's a better way to do it. And there's a better way to protect yourself as a landlord as well as, take care of your properties in that regard. So I think currently a lot of landlords, obviously the obvious cases would be the security damages for their security deposit, rather the damages thereof when a tenant moves out. Other considerations are some landlords do use it when the tenant has issues with affording rent, but maybe they're going through a rough time. So looking at currently the COVID-19 issue where maybe I was on pay, I couldn't take a salary for 3 months, and therefore I could utilize some of my deposit to cover at least a portion of my rental. But I think traditionally this wasn't always the case. And if you sort of look at the law that sort of governs the collections of security deposits, such as your Rental Housing Act, it never caters for using the deposit as rental guarantee. That's not what it was for. It was meant to be purely for damages. And some landlords do take liberties. I'm not going to say a lot because I can't give you the exact figures, because obviously some people don't report it. They do take liberties and sort of abuse that sort of structure by saying, look, I have the deposit, and therefore if they're late and they don't even give people sort of the mandatory 20-day period of saying coming up with the rent for that month. So it is one of those touchy issues. But I think sort of the why we exist as Depofy, there's a need for deposit-free rentals is there's a lot of cases where if you're looking at, especially in a country like South Africa where inequality is so strife, there's a lot of issues and places where I can afford to pay the rent as a tenant, and I can actually, I have an income, but because of needs and other factors in my life, I don't have a high savings index, and therefore I can't afford that 1.5 or that two times of my rent for the first month. And therefore, being able to move in and still guaranteeing to give you that sort of security is something that caters for those sort of people. And then you look at people who are sort of your students. When they move into a property, it's not just looking at the rent. There's a lot of cost and factors that sort of come in at the same time as your registration. They need tuition money, they need books money. So there's a whole lot of strain on the funder, being in some cases the student funding themselves. So these are all sort of issues that we are trying to address by saying, look, we can sort of lower the burden and make it easier for your tenant to come in, provided, we can actually de-risk and vet that tenant and make sure that they will be able to cover the rental that is necessary throughout the lease, the tenancy period.
And certainly one of the things, Victor, that I wanted to speak about is, and you've just touched on it, is how then do you de-risk? Because as you can imagine, certainly a lot of landlords are sitting at home saying, okay, I can concede that depending on who my target market is, perhaps at that particular time, certainly if, for example, they're students, affording whether it's 1 month's rental deposit plus the actual rent could be quite high, considering that they must be paying registration fees and books and other related costs. So they can concede that bit, but in the same breath, they'll say, well, students typically don't tend to take care of the places that they live in. I'm sure a lot of us who certainly went through the university or technical experience and lived at res or outside accommodation have seen how our peers didn't take care of the places that they were living in, even throughout the semester itself, never mind when it's time to move out. So there's always some level of damage that certainly a place undergoes. And so a landlord is thinking, well, while I might be sympathetic to what a tenant might be going through at a particular point, how do I then make sure that my place is still well taken care of, and that by the time a tenant essentially leaves the place, it's in the same space that they found it, condition rather, that they found it in when they moved in. And in the event where it's not, how will they then be able to ensure that they get it to that level without them having to spend that money? So essentially, how do you, deal with the de-risking component?
Okay, thank you for that question. So part of, I think, the problem is a lot of people assume that, the damages are high. But if you look at the data, it's not actually that the average tenant is damaging properties beyond, like repair, and it costs a lot of money. Like the majority of the issues are normally cleaning issues and a few maybe replacement things. And it's normally you're looking at your door handles, your window handles, but it's never actually something that is that high of a cost. But that's not I'm guessing the crux of it. What we do as Depofy is we're not saying, you won't be covered once you remove the deposit. So how we come in is, first of all, we look at what you're asking for in terms of rent, and then we risk adjust that amount in order to sort of cater for putting money aside for you as a landlord to actually get money to take care of your property immediately when your tenant moves in. So we have what we call the Depofy wallet. So what happens is when your tenant moves in, we take a portion of the rent, which is risk adjusted now. Let's say it was an extra 200 Rand a month, just to keep the example sort of on round numbers. And we collect that monthly and put it in this wallet. And what happens is when they move out, you have access to that wallet within the first 24 hours to get your property back up to speed. But if the amount that's in that wallet is not enough to fix whatever damages are there, then we will give you up to 2 months rent. So whatever your rent is, whatever you're asking for, we will still cover you up to double that, which is more or less double the deposit you would have been asking for, to actually replace anything that needs to be fixed within your property as soon as possible. But I think part of the benefit of this is we also help your tenants by saying, look, if you do take care of that property, whatever was in that wallet amount is what we will give you back as a tenant to say, look, you didn't damage anything. Therefore, this wallet amount will go back to you 100% of that without us actually taking it from the tenant. Because at the end of the day, it was money that was sort of put aside in case there were those little cleaning, the carpet cleaning, those little stains there and there. But if they don't do anything and they do take care of that property, it is only fair that we give it back. So we do try and make sure that we take care of the landlord's property. But I think another thing that we do extra in terms of de-risking, like you said, we do vet the tenants. So traditionally, landlords vet their tenants, but we also go above and beyond. And whatever tenant they come up, they suggest to us and say, I like this tenant. I want this tenant to rent my property deposit free. We will go extra and vet that tenant for free and make sure that that tenant can actually afford to stay there and they have a good track record with, say, their former landlords, if we can get that information, etc.
And I think then perhaps let's move the conversation to exploring more what Depofy does, and you've already certainly started in that direction. I'm sure viewers at home are thinking, okay, so I know that the risk is being considered, so I don't need to overthink that component. I certainly know that I don't need to stress about my place not being left in a condition that I want it to be in when a tenant leaves, because in the event where that happens, that is covered. So for viewers at home who are probably watching and are thinking, this might be an alternative way that I want to, list perhaps all or some of my properties, especially considering that we are currently in the middle of a global pandemic where certainly a lot of people's liquidity has been affected. People will be looking rather at moving to different places. Some are probably going to even look at downgrading, moving to a more affordable accommodation, and having access to what they would have typically used as their deposit is certainly something that's going to go a long way. So how do viewers essentially, what's the starting point when they want to perhaps go rent-free? And would you even suggest that they do it by themselves? I mean, certainly Depofy is one way that they can do it. They certainly have security guarantees, as you pointed us to. Would you recommend that this is something that a landlord consider doing by themselves as opposed to perhaps using your services?
So to be honest with you, I think it would be a funny sort of situation for me to suggest that they can't do it on their own. They can possibly do it, but I guess they wouldn't get the benefits that we sort of offer as a service. Because above and beyond sort of the cover, we also help the landlord through the tenant acquisition phase of sort of their journey. So we also do a supporting system where we will sort of promote your property, help you list that property. And all of these are sort of add-ons that are free to the landlord. So going on this journey on your own is something you can attempt, and you might most likely succeed. But I think, if you remember sort of most of the famous quotes is, if you want to go far, you go with other people. So I think it's a journey we want to go with a lot of people. We are already on this road with a lot of our partners and helping a lot of people sort of realize that. I mean, like you mentioned in your comment, that some of our latest sort of tenants are people who are finding themselves in a situation where they're moving to a different sort of income level, or sort of downgrading, so to speak, because they're realizing that, I could be trying to get out of this situation by getting myself a property that is more affordable, that's at a level that I can afford, and without necessarily having to deplete whatever's remaining of the little savings that I have. So it's a good way to also get out of those positions that people found themselves in when they had to, use their deposits and have to pay it back after the 3 months payment holidays and so forth. So it is alternatives we've been sort of implementing with a lot of tenants and a lot of landlords. And I think moving forward, it's sort of a better way to move with us, because there are those safety nets and people who are guiding you through the process. It's not you sort of stumbling along and trying to figure it out, which you may successfully do, but it's better to figure it out with people who have already figured it out with others, with a proven track record, so to speak.
And I actually really like that one, Victor. We're going to go for a quick break. We're going to come back. I certainly want to, hear what are some of the things that landlords should be watching out for in the event where they go it alone? What are some of the considerations that you need to be mindful of if you want to rent your particular apartment deposit free? Because as we know, there certainly are different factors that one needs to consider if you're going to go through that option. And if you're a landlord and you've done it before, do share what you experience and what best practices you essentially used to make sure that you're able to, recover if your apartment was, for example, damaged at the end of the term, or what kind of agreement you entered into with your tenants for that particular lease agreement. We certainly want to hear from you. And if you're a tenant, how did you find renting in a place that didn't require a deposit, didn't provide the financial ease that you essentially needed in that particular time? We want to hear from you. Do comment below if you have any questions and comments. We're going to go for a quick break. And when we come back, I'll still be talking to Victor Motha, who's the co-founder and CEO of Depofy Financial Technology. We'll be back just after this. Welcome back to episode 65 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama. This evening, I'm joined by Victor Motha, who's the co-founder and CEO of Depofy Financial Technology. And we're certainly talking, consider this alternative and rent your next apartment deposit free. If you're a tenant or a landlord and you've once used, or rented an apartment deposit free, or you've certainly been a landlord that has put out your particular apartment rent free, then we certainly want to hear from you. Victor, before the break, I did say I certainly want to find out what kind of considerations should landlords be mindful of in the event where they want to consider listing their particular property rent free.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that you need to be mindful of if you want to go on this journey, sort of as a lone wolf, it's firstly, you need to be sure in terms of the tenant that you do offer this to. So you need to do your background checks, your credit checks, and so forth. You need to sort of make sure that you can actually trust the person that you're going into this arrangement with. And I think a lot of people sort of, use a lot of templates that they find online for their legal agreements and their leases and so forth. if you want to go and try offering deposit free, I think your lease agreement needs to very explicitly state the terms of sort of that agreement between you and your tenant. Part of the beauty of sort of what we have is we have a very good agreement that sort of governs what to do in most of the situations that may arise. And I only use the term most because I think, as any lawyer would tell you, it's almost impossible to say I have thought of every single scenario that will ever happen. But yeah, I think one of the key things is trust. And what we try to do at Depofy is we try to build that trust. That's why we partner with landlords to offer this service. It's one of the things where we go through a journey of understanding our partners' needs and understanding the sort of tenants that they trust. Because I think, as you're aware, Zama, as a property investor yourself, is most property owners and landlords have a preferred sort of demographic, being, you know, they prefer students, they prefer people who are, you know, young professionals, etc. So we sort of try and guide you and find those people along that fall and coincide with the sort of profile that you're looking for your property. And also between that, we try and find the best out of that pool. You know, we're not just taking anyone who says I can rent deposit free all of a sudden. So it's one of those things where the key thing to focus on is trust. Is we are in the business of fostering trust between you as a landlord and you as a tenant. Because I think one of the things that a deposit does that maybe we tend to overlook is it builds that trust. It gives me that confidence to say this person can take care of my property. Whether, you know, it's the same as traditionally, you know, the lobola sort of metaphor. It's one of those things where it's not evidence enough, but it sort of gives me the confidence that, look, I can trust this person. They can actually afford to be here, and therefore I think they'll take good care of my property. And what another way sort of to look at it from the side of the tenant is, you know, I have some of my money invested in this engagement, in this commitment. I've committed to actually taking care of that property, and it's one of the things that people sort of may not necessarily lean towards when they talk about what a deposit does, because it's less quantitative and more qualitative. So it's one of those attributes that you know, it's things you that are hard to measure, so to speak. But it's one of the things that we focus on. We focus on fostering that trust without necessarily having it to rely heavily on the side of the tenant in terms of them providing a large monetary engagement or commitment to this relationship. So yeah, no,
yes.
I think you can continue. It's fine.
I was actually going to say that we're already getting questions and comments from viewers at home, and I actually like you know, the sentiment around how the different ways that one can look at a deposit isn't only from a qualitative perspective, but also from a quantitative perspective. And it is something, of course, that does foster trust, because oftentimes when a tenant has paid the deposit, we make a value deduction from it. And one of the big sort of takeaways is that they are going to take care of the place, because at the end of their lease agreement, they certainly want to be able to you know, get their full deposit with interest at the end of the period, as opposed to the deposit having to be used to fix whatever damage that they would have done to the property. So it certainly does go a long way in us being clear about, you know, the parameters of the relationship, beyond shelter being provided for, but certainly that it's also going to be well taken care of, so that we don't have to use the deposit to fix whatever you know, damage you would potentially make in that particular property. And a question that we've got coming here is from Ayanda Zibuvo, who asks, you know, what do you advise me to do if I buy an apartment which currently has a tenant, and a tenant refuses to sign a contract, and that contract being the lease agreement? So this is essentially a landlord who is now happily a new owner of a property and probably might want to go rent free, but they're unable to get the tenant who's occupying that particular property to sign a rental agreement.
Okay, I think I have a few questions, but obviously I can't ask them to Ayanda. So for me, I think what's more a concern is if I'm purchasing a new property uh, and and there's someone occupying it. I can't quite understand, how the handover process happened with that person still occupying the property without necessarily some sort of agreement between me and them having gone forward. I think something sort of terrible has to have happened between you and the person who was helping you, finance that property and acquire that property. Because I know from experience, I think a year or so ago, after acquiring a property myself with my father, uh, basically what happened is there was a person there, but before we could actually have the sort of the property handed over to us, there had to be an agreement with, will that person continue living there? And if so, under what agreements going forward? Because I think you can't give me a property and then I sort of inherit problems with tenants that I don't even know and never agreed to live there. And primarily, if they don't want to sign an agreement, then I think you are well within your rights to sort of move on and take legal steps to actually get them out of your property. And I think that the best route for you to take is do consider taking legal steps, because one of the things that might get you into trouble is sort of going at it rogue and trying to handle it yourself in some other third party ways that aren't necessarily the best solution for your case.
Yeah, and I think certainly one of the big things you've already pointed out is often when you're buying a property, the lease agreement that's in place stays in place even after the property has been sold. So you almost need to find out if there was a lease agreement, and when the lease agreement essentially expires, what clauses are there in terms of when it expires after X date? Are they on a month-to-month basis? Does it have to be renewed? So you almost need to understand the nature of that particular lease agreement that is in place, if it's there. In the event where it's not, then it's a completely different story. But you certainly do need to seek, legal advice to get a sense of the best way to handle it. Because oftentimes during a sale of a property, you do get a sense of whether there's a tenant in place, whether there's a lease agreement, what the lease agreement says. I've even gone to asking for a copy of the lease agreement to get a sense of whether I am happy with buying a property. Let's say it's only 3 months into the lease and it's a 12-year long lease agreement. Am I happy with that tenant? And will I be happy with having a property that I know is already leased and I won't be able to take over, as in live in the property, because there's a lease agreement in place. So that's certainly something that you always need to be mindful of when you're buying a property, and understanding if there are other lease agreements with the particular property that you're dealing with. A comment here coming in from one of our regulars, Bongs Sababwena, who says, whether we like it or not, deposit-free rentals will be around for a while for new rentals. And that's something that we certainly need to be mindful of. We're certainly living under unprecedented times. People don't have as much liquid, they're not as liquid as certainly they were before. We're already saying earlier that a lot of people are probably also going to look at different ways to downgrade their lifestyle. So if you're living in an apartment that's, let's say, 12,000 rands, you might be looking at ones that are perhaps in the 8,000 rand range. And we all know, depending where you live, certainly in the Gauteng region, you'd still be able to get really good rentals in that price point. So now more than ever, we're simply trying to make sure that we save as much money as we can, because you don't know if in the coming months you perhaps might face either retrenchments or perhaps even less pay, as we've seen a lot of companies do. Victor, so I certainly want to hear from you what your advice would be, what your tips rather would be for landlords who've typically been used to having deposit rentals and have gotten quite accustomed to it, as you're saying, that it's certainly provided them with a sense of safety. It's provided them with a sense of, I can trust the new tenant that's coming in, and now have to slightly evolve in the way that they are structuring their rentals, perhaps even going deposit-free. What tips would you give them as they potentially transition from what they've been doing for the past couple of years to perhaps trying this different method, whether it's just for this period or even beyond? And we don't even know what life beyond COVID is going to look like. So it's certainly going to be like this for quite a while. What tips would you give to those landlords?
Zama, look, I think the best thing that someone can do for themselves as a landlord, especially when you're looking at yourself as someone who's an investor, is to get as educated as possible about the transition you want to go through. And part of that journey, I think, would be to sort of get in touch with people who are in this business, who are doing this, and finding out as much as you can about how this fits in with what you do and how it can help you as a business person or as an investor or as just a property owner who's not necessarily thinking of themselves as growing their property portfolio, but would like to manage and sort of get that steady stream of income from the properties that they do have. So getting in touch with us and finding out sort of how this works, what's in it for you, how can you move into this sort of space and sustain yourself, because we have partners now who've been with us for over a year who are still going strong and are actually getting more and more tenants. So trying to find out how can I transition safely without necessarily, increasing the level of risk that I expose my business to. So part of that journey is education. So what we do is we want to help you. We are more than happy to, talk to you and actually take you through what the process looks like, what's in it for you, how can it work. And I don't think I've mentioned this, but we don't charge landlords a fee. It's like many people expect this service to come at a cost, but we don't have a landlord premium. And a part of our growth and part of what we are hoping to do and what we will be doing in the near future, I think in the coming months or so, is we have been working on our API and we'll be exposing, the Depofy API and helping other people who even just list properties to actually start offering Depofy to their customers. So it's not just a thing that we want to keep to ourselves and our partners. We are opening it up for people who are in the management business, people who are in the property owning business, people who are in the property listing business. So I think the best thing to do is go onto the website, find out how it works. If you don't find out, just sign up and request, a service consultant to help you through the process and sort of take you through the journey of what we can do for you as a company.
And that is Victor Motha, who's the co-founder and CEO of Depofy Financial Technology. We have shared their contact details down here below, so you can visit their website and find out more about how you can go deposit-free in your rental properties. And that, of course, folks, is the end of this evening's episode of the Private Property Podcast. It certainly has been an interesting way to start rethinking the way that we do property, and certainly start rethinking even the way that we're slowly managing our property portfolios, especially to deal with the crisis that we find ourselves in, and making sure that we still are as profitable as possible, but also be mindful of the different players that we have in our ecosystem on our property management and certainly property investment journey. We're going to be back again tomorrow evening right here on the Private Property Podcast. Remember to participate in the competition that we're running, where you stand a chance of winning one of two 1,000 Rand cash prizes. And all you have to do to win or enter, all you have to do to stand a chance of winning that competition is to tell us what you love about your town or your city. It could be a particular feature, it could be a particular thing that you're able to do there. We certainly want to hear all from you. You can even send us a picture of the particular feature that you like about your town or city. Do enter that competition in the link below that we've shared, and we'll be choosing two lucky winners who are going to walk away with two 1,000 Rand cash prizes. We'll be announcing the winner right here on the Private Property Show on Friday. You simply do not want to miss that one. We'll be back again tomorrow evening. Until then, I do hope you're staying home and staying safe.
Hi, I'm Motha, and I'm an entrepreneur from Soweto. Soweto's come a long way, from a small township to a mini city of its own. Soweto's got some really, really nice suburbs, like Diepkloof Extension, but the locals call it Diepkloof Expensive. Orlando is known as the suburb that had the first brick houses built in Soweto. Orlando Stadium for its iconic games between Kaizer Chiefs and Pirates. And most importantly, Vilakazi Street, where Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu resided. To the west of Soweto, you find suburbs of Dobsonville and Protea. These two suburbs are actually very cosmopolitan, fresh, young, and very new. Right next door to Soweto, we have our neighboring suburb, which is Eldorado Park. For a little adventure and a little fun, Soweto's got so many night spots, from the News Cafe at Mponya Mall, to your Vilagazi streets at Kumzi's, to just chilling at Chafpozi just between the towers and having a simple braai vleis, chisanyama. Something very close to my heart is actually seeing people move back into Soweto, growing businesses, remodeling homes. It merely says to us that Soweto is a growing city. There's way more to this place than what we think. Soweto needs to be discovered daily. I'm so proud to call Soweto my home, and this is my neighborhood.
Tips for dealing with the bank. So perhaps you're renting in a property where it is run by a body corporate.
Understanding the basic calculation, income minus expenses, and you want to be left with a positive income.
It is a very tough game. It's not easy at all.
To stay ahead of knowing exactly what your clients need, what their teething issues are.
Have a joint move-in inspection.
That a lot of people that are coming into sectional title homeowners associations are, just like you described, not only first-time homeowners, but first-time owners and residents in community schemes.
They get to see the perspective from the other side of the aisle. And I think that's a really important thing to do.
It's a market that's estimated to be transacting at least 9 billion rand per year. So it's a huge market.
In order to get there, you need to be able to build up a track record.
Your cash flow model needs to be sharp.
A quote comes to mind. The best time to buy a property was about 10 years ago. The next best time is now.